The night Kang Tae-jun's father pointed at him across a room full of criminal royalty and said, "You will marry her, or I will destroy everything you think you've built." Nobody in that room expected the silence that followed. Not the kind of silence that means submission. The kind that means something is about to break. Tae-jun didn't rage, didn't argue. He set his glass down on the table so carefully it didn't make a sound, turned and walked out of the room, and every man seated at that table, men who had ordered violence, who had buried secrets, who had survived decades of blood and betrayal, every single one of them exhaled only after the door clicked shut behind him. Because they knew. When Kang Tae-jun went quiet like that, someone always paid for it. They just didn't know yet that this time, the person who would pay the most was him. If you've ever watched someone lose everything they thought was theirs, their name, their power, the future they were promised, and then choose to burn it down themselves before anyone else could take it, then you understand what this story is about. If you haven't, stay with us. Because what happens next will make you question everything you thought you knew about control, about love, and about what a man is really willing to sacrifice when the one person who ever saw him clearly is about to walk out of his life forever. This is the story of Kang Tae-jun and Naomi Carter. He looked at her, and he lost his mind. He saw another man look at her, and he wanted to tear the city apart. Before this is over, you'll understand exactly why. Subscribe to this channel right now and hit that notification bell, because this is the kind of story you do not want to come to halfway through. Like this video, and drop a comment telling us what city or country you're watching from. We want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go. The night it started, Naomi Carter was carrying a tray of champagne flutes through a hallway that cost more than she made in 3 years. She knew that because she'd done the math. Not out of bitterness, she wasn't built for bitterness, didn't have the time for it, but because math was how she kept herself grounded. Every shift had a number. Every number went toward a goal. The goal was Maya's tuition, Maya's books, Maya's future, which was really just another way of saying the only thing Naomi had left of her parents was her sister, and she was not going to let that girl down. So she counted things, the square footage of Gangnam mansions she'd catered, the price per bottle of wine she'd poured for men who never once looked at her face, the number of hours between her next shift and the next. She was doing that math now, walking down a corridor lined with art she couldn't name, and toward a fountain she definitely recognized when the crash happened. She stopped, listened. Another crash, heavier. Then the distinctive shatter of something that had been expensive before it hit the floor. Her co-worker, Young-soo, grabbed her arm from behind. "Don't." His voice was flat with the kind of fear that came from knowing something she didn't yet. That's the heir's study. Nobody goes in there when he's what? Young-soo just looked at her. Just don't. Which was, in Naomi Carter's personal experience, exactly the wrong thing to say to her. She didn't barge in, she wasn't reckless. She knocked once, sharp and practical, and when no answer came and the silence after it felt wrong, the kind of wrong that preceded someone doing something they couldn't undo, she turned the handle and stepped inside. The room was a disaster, not the decorative, performative kind of mess that rich people sometimes stage to look interesting. An actual disaster. A decanter in 3 pieces against the far wall. A glass tumbler cracked in half on the desk. Books knocked to the floor. And in the middle of all of it, Kang Tae-jun, the most feared man under 40 in South Korea's underground economy, standing with his right hand dripping blood onto a rug that probably cost what she owed in back rent. He didn't look powerful in that moment. He looked like a man who had run out of somewhere to put something too large to carry. "Get out," he said. His voice was quiet. That was the thing about it. Not loud, not theatrical, just absolutely certain, the way a closed door is certain. Naomi looked at his hand. Then she looked at the mess around him. Then she did the thing she always did when the situation in front of her required a choice between sensible and necessary. She chose necessary. "I need a cloth," she said, not to him, to the room, because she'd spotted a bar cart against the wall with a towel draped over the handle. She crossed to it, picked up the towel, and turned back toward him. Tae-jun hadn't moved. He was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite name, not anger, confusion, something between them, like a man trying to locate a noise he'd never heard before. "I told you to leave. You're bleeding on the rug." "I don't care about the rug." "Okay." She held out the towel. Then you won't mind holding this against your hand while I sweep up the glass before someone else walks through here barefoot. A beat of silence. He took the towel. She wasn't sure which of them was more surprised. She didn't ask him what happened. That was the first thing he noticed. Everyone in Tae-jun's world asked questions. Questions were how people gathered leverage. His father's lieutenants asked questions behind their eyes even when their mouths stayed closed. The arranged marriage liaison, who had called 3 times in the last hour, would have opened with a question designed to make him feel cornered. Even his oldest friend, Shin Jun-ho, asked questions when he was worried, which meant his concern always arrived, wrapped in the shape of an interrogation. Naomi Carter crouched in the broken glass and swept it toward the wall with practiced efficiency, and she did not ask him a single thing. "You're not scared," he said. It came out less like an observation and more like an accusation. She glanced up. "Should I be? Most people are. Most people haven't worked a double shift and then been sent to clean up after a grown man's tantrum at midnight." She said it matter-of-factly, not cruelly. "I'm too tired to be scared." He stared at her. "You're calling this a tantrum. I'm calling it what it looks like." She stood, held the gathered glass in the cloth, and looked around for a trash container. "You're rich. Something didn't go your way. You broke things. If you were in my neighborhood, we'd call it a tantrum." She found the container behind the desk, deposited the glass, and looked at him with something that was not quite sympathy and not quite challenge. "Does your hand need stitches?" It did not, as it turned out. The cut was shallow. She wrapped it with the first aid kit she found in the ensuite bathroom. She'd asked where it was with the same no-nonsense directness she seemed to apply to everything, and he sat on the edge of the desk and let her. Because he genuinely could not think of a reason not to. No one had handled him like this since he was a child. He didn't know what to do with it. "You have another shift tomorrow," she said, while she worked, repeating the things she'd told him when he tried to dismiss her a second time. "In this house? Different hotel. Breakfast service." She smoothed the edge of the bandage. "Starts at 6. It's past midnight, I know." She said it without complaint. Acknowledgement. He looked at her hands. Capable. A little rough at the knuckles. She wasn't wearing any jewelry except small gold studs in her ears that looked like they'd been there for years. He noticed she did everything with an economy of motion that people only developed when they'd spent a long time not being able to afford wasted effort. "Why are you in Seoul?" he asked. She glanced up. A question for a question, she seemed to register that, because something in her expression recalibrated slightly. "My sister got into a language program. I followed her." "You followed her." "She's 17, she can't follow herself." He almost said something. Caught it. Looked at the wrapped hand instead. That was when she picked up her tray from where she'd set it by the door. She must have brought it in with her. He hadn't noticed and she turned to go, and the locket fell. He didn't see it fall. He saw it on the floor after she'd closed the door behind her. Small. Silver. A little tarnished. He picked it up and turned it over, and the clasp was broken, which was probably how it had slipped from wherever she'd been keeping it. He opened it. A photograph, small and old, of a man and a woman who shared Naomi's cheekbones and the particular quality of stillness in her eyes. They were smiling, like people who didn't know yet that they were in a photograph anyone would study after they were gone. He closed the locket. He set it on his desk. He didn't know her last name. He didn't know which hotel she worked the breakfast shift at. He didn't know anything, except that she'd walked into the worst hour he'd had in years, and treated him like a human being instead of a bomb about to detonate, and now she was gone. And he was holding the only thing she had left, of the people she'd followed her sister across the world to honor. He told himself he'd return it. He told himself that was the only reason he kept thinking about her. He was wrong on both counts, but it would take him longer than he'd like to admit before he understood that. The arranged marriage had a name, Park Seo-yeon. Tae-jun knew her the way you know anyone in your world, by reputation and proximity and the shared understanding that you are both instruments of someone else's plan. She was intelligent, composed, and entirely uninterested in him as a person, which was the one thing he could actually respect about the arrangement, because at least it was honest. This wasn't a love match. This was a merger. Her father's organization controlled Gyeonggi province. His father's organization controlled Greater Seoul. Together, they would control a corridor, an economic and criminal infrastructure that no government investigation had yet found the right pressure point to fracture. His father had explained this to him the way engineers explained load-bearing walls. Practical, immovable, non-negotiable. You don't have to love her, his father, Kang Il-soo, had said. You have to marry her. And if I won't, then I will remove you from every position of authority you hold, restructure the succession, and ensure that what you've spent 8 years building becomes someone else's legacy. Yours will be the name history forgets. His father said things like this without raising his voice, which was why they landed the way they did. Il-soo had spent a lifetime learning that the most devastating threats were delivered at a conversational volume. Tae-jun had spent his whole life in the shadow of that particular lesson. He had walked out of the room because the alternative was giving his father the satisfaction of watching him react. But the rage had followed him to the study, and then the decanter had followed the rage, and then the glass, and then somehow Naomi Carter had been standing in the doorway, telling him she was too tired to be scared of him. And now it was 3 a.m, and he was sitting at his desk, holding a stranger's locket, and thinking about a woman who hadn't flinched. His phone showed 11 missed calls, 4 from the marriage liaison, 3 from his father's chief of staff, 2 from Jun-ho, 1 from a number he didn't recognize, turned out to be his father himself, which was unusual enough to mean the situation had escalated from demand to ultimatum. He didn't call any of them back. He sat in the quiet and turned the locket over in his hand and thought about the way she'd said, "If you were in my neighborhood, we'd call it a tantrum." And for the first time in longer than he could remember, something in his chest had moved that wasn't anger or strategy or calculation. He didn't know what to call it yet. 3 weeks passed. Tae-jun had resources that most people didn't. He also had a principle he'd maintained his entire adult life about the line between awareness and obsession, and he was careful about that line, meticulous about it, because he'd watched men in his world cross it and lose everything that mattered, including their judgment. But he told his head of security, Han Dong-wook, that there had been a catering crew working the family home 3 weeks ago, and among them a Black American woman, and he needed to locate her for the purpose of returning personal property. Dong-wook was experienced enough not to ask follow-up questions. He came back in 48 hours with a name, an address in Mapo district, and a work schedule that included 4 regular gigs across the hospitality sector. Naomi Carter, 29, American citizen with a working visa, 2 years in Seoul. Previous address, Chicago, Illinois. Current dependent, Maya Carter, 17, enrolled in a language immersion academy in Seo Diamond District. Parents deceased. Traffic accident 4 years prior. Tae-jun read that last line twice. Then he put the file away and did not look at it again for another week, because looking at it again felt like crossing a line he hadn't decided yet whether to cross. The night he saw her again, he hadn't planned it. He was in a car moving through Mapo district after a meeting that had run late, and his driver took a route adjustment due to road construction, and the adjusted route ran past a brightly lit pojang matcha cart on a street corner where a woman in a puffy winter coat was standing with a younger girl who shared her posture and her stillness and was clearly unmistakably her sister. "Stop," Tae-jun said. Dong-wook, who was in the front passenger seat, turned his head a fraction of an inch. "Sir, stop the car." The car stopped. Tae-jun watched Naomi from across the street. She was laughing at something Maya had said, really laughing. Not the polite performance of laughter, but the kind that caught you off guard and made you look younger than you usually allowed yourself to look. She bought 2 cups of something hot and handed one to Maya and knocked her shoulder gently when Maya took 2 to answer a question, and Maya shoved her lightly back. And the whole exchange lasted maybe 45 seconds and contained more warmth than anything Tae-jun had witnessed in the last 3 months of his own life combined. "Sir, should I—" "No." He said it before Dong-wook could finish the question. The car moved. He sat with the locket in his coat pocket, which was where he'd been carrying it for 3 weeks, without acknowledging to himself that was what he was doing, and he stared out the window and tried to locate the practical, strategic, non-sentimental reason for the feeling currently occupying his chest. He couldn't find one. He found her professionally, which felt like a compromise he could justify. She was catering a private gallery event in Itaewon the following Thursday. He attended the gallery event. Not for her, he had a legitimate reason to be there. A business associate hosting the opening who had been asking for his attendance for 2 months. He would have gone eventually. He went that Thursday. He saw her within 4 minutes of arriving. She was moving through the crowd with the same focused economy he'd observed in the study tray level. Path efficient, attention on the logistics of her job rather than on the art or the guests. She hadn't seen him yet. He waited. When she turned and their eyes met, the thing that crossed her face was not what he expected. Not fear, not calculation, not the starstruck paralysis most people displayed when they realized who he was. It was something more complicated: recognition, wariness, and underneath both of those, a flicker of something that looked almost like it could have been relief before she locked it down. She looked at his bandaged hand, mostly healed now, and then looked at his face, and then looked deliberately away and continued doing her job. He was next to her within 30 seconds, Miss Carter. She didn't stop moving, Mr. Kang. You know who I am. Everyone knows who you are. She pivoted to deposit empty glasses on a side table. Doesn't mean I know you. You know my first name. I looked you up after I couldn't find my locket. Her voice stayed level. I figured if I'd dropped it in a crime boss's study, I should know whose study it was. He reached into his coat pocket and held the locket out. She stopped. She looked at it in his hand, and the thing that happened on her face in that moment was something that cracked the professional composure completely open. Just for a second. Just long enough for him to see what was underneath it. Something raw and private and worn smooth from being held too long. She took it without touching his hand, closed her fist around it. Thank you. The clasp is broken, I know. It's been broken for a while. I keep meaning to fix it. I can have it repaired. I don't need you to do that. It would take a day. I know a jeweler in Mr. Kang. She looked at him directly for the first time. Thank you for keeping it. I mean that. But I don't need anything from you. He held her gaze. I didn't say you did. A pause. She was trying to read him. He could see it, trying to locate the agenda, the angle, the thing he wanted in exchange for simple decency. It was a reasonable thing to look for. In his world, simple decency was almost always a transaction. Have a good evening, she said, and turned away. He let her go. But he watched her for the rest of the night, and he told himself it was caution that he was cataloging a person who had seen the inside of his family's home during a vulnerable moment, who might become a liability, and he almost believed it. Except that a liability wasn't something you tracked across a crowded room and felt a specific tightening in your chest. Every time some other man's eyes followed the same path, yours had been following all evening. There was a man, someone's business associate, young, easy in the way that people were, when they'd never had to calculate anything in their lives. He crossed Naomi's path twice. The second time he said something to her, and she gave him a polite professional response that was not a smile and not an invitation, and the man laughed anyway, like it was both. Tae-jun's jaw locked. He turned away from the sight deliberately. He told himself, none of your business. He told himself, she is nobody to you. He told himself, you don't even know her. All three of those things were true, and none of them helped at all. 3 days later, 2 men cornered her in Mapo district at 10:15 at night, on a street that had a working camera on one end and a broken one on the other. They'd chosen the gap between. Dong-wook flagged it from the surveillance rotation that Tae-jun had, in a decision he had made without fully examining, quietly extended to cover the neighborhoods around Naomi's building. Not because he was watching her. Because there were active criminal elements with interests in Mapo district, and he had reason to maintain general awareness of movements in that area. That was the story. 2 men unidentified. They've positioned her against a wall. She's not complying. Dong-wook kept his voice neutral. Orders? Tae-jun was already out of his seat. The car covered the distance in 4 minutes. By the time they reached the street, one of the men had Naomi's arm, and the other was doing the thing people did when they wanted to make someone afraid without touching them, yet moving too close, taking up too much of her air. She was not afraid. Or if she was, it was living in the same body as something that looked a lot like fury. She was pulling back against the man's grip and saying something with enough force that Tae-jun could hear her voice from 30 feet away, even if he couldn't make out the words. He got out of the car. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. 2 of Dong-wook's men had flanked the scene from opposite ends before the attackers even registered the vehicle, and when they did register, it registered who had stepped out of it. The calculation on their faces moved through shock, reassessment, and a rapid surrender of ego that was almost physically visible. The man released Naomi's arm. Tae-jun walked toward him. stopped at a distance that was technically civil and practically not. Looked at him for long enough that the silence became its own kind of message. Walk away, he said. Quiet, conversational, the same volume his father used. They walked. He turned to Naomi. She was breathing hard and her coat was pulled crooked where the man had grabbed her, and she was looking at him with an expression that had no gratitude in it whatsoever, which he hadn't expected, and which somehow made the whole thing worse. Who were they? He asked. Not your business. They had a specific purpose. That wasn't a mugging. They were delivering a message. She pulled her coat straight, looked away. Thank you for your help. Good night, Miss Carter. I said good night. He should have let her go. He'd intervened. The threat was neutralized. The rational action was to confirm she was physically unharmed, offer a card if she needed follow-up security resources, and leave. There's a girl in Seodaemun District, he said. 17 years old. Language Academy. Naomi went completely still. If those men were connected to whoever sent them, he continued, and if whoever sent them knows that the fastest way to move you is through her, then good night is not going to solve your problem. The sound she made was almost not a sound at all, a breath. But it hit like something much heavier. She looked at him. And the thing in her face now was different from everything she'd shown him before. Not wariness, not professional distance, not the particular composure of someone who'd learned to handle herself in hard situations. It was the thing underneath all of that. The thing she kept all the way down, the thing that never got to come out at midnight, on a street corner, in front of the most dangerous man she'd ever met. What do you want? She said. Her voice was quiet. Not soft. Something else. People like you don't help for free. So what is it? He looked at her for a moment. Right now, he said, I want to get you and your sister somewhere safe. The rest is a conversation. She looked at him for a long time. He watched her doing the math, the same kind of calculating efficiency he'd seen in every movement she made, applied now to him, to the situation, to the variables of trust and risk and the specific cost of accepting help from a man whose world was one she'd been working inside without ever belonging to it. If anything happens to Maya, she said, anything, nothing will happen to Maya. That's not a promise. That's a sentence. I need to hear it as a promise. He held her gaze. Nothing will happen to your sister. That's a promise. Something in her settled. Not relief. He'd decided she didn't do relief the simple way. More like a very tired soldier making a decision she wouldn't have made if she'd had other options. Fine, she said. Show me where we're going. The penthouse in Gangnam took Maya approximately 11 minutes to lose her composure over. She stood in the middle of the living room with her mouth open, turned in a slow circle, looked at the floor-to-ceiling windows, and the lights of Seoul spread below them like a dropped handful of stars, and said, Naomi, this is a movie. Are we in a movie? No, Naomi said, dropping her bag on the nearest chair. This floor is heated. I can feel it through my socks. Naomi, the floor is heated. I can see that. There's a piano. He has a piano. Does he play? Tae-jun, who had been standing near the window pretending to look at his phone, said without turning around, No. Maya swung toward him. 17 and entirely unintimidated in the way only teenagers could manage when they hadn't had time yet to learn what they were supposed to fear. Then why do you have one? Maya, Naomi said. It's a reasonable question. It came with the apartment, Tae-jun said, which was not true, but he found he couldn't explain the real answer, which was that his mother had played and he'd bought the piano at an auction when he was 22. In the middle of a period of his life he no longer discussed and had subsequently refused to let anyone touch it. Maya accepted this with the pragmatism of someone who had decided to be comfortable here, regardless of the circumstances. Cool. Can I use the kitchen? I'm starving and I make excellent ramyeon. Naomi started. The kitchen is available, Tae-jun said. Maya disappeared toward it with remarkable speed. Naomi watched her go. Then she turned to Tae-jun. The professional composure was back, but it was thinner now, sitting over something he could see the edges of. You said the rest was a conversation. It is. Then, let's have it. He looked at her. The woman who had wrapped his hand with a hotel towel and called him a tantrum. The woman whose locket he'd carried for 3 weeks in his coat pocket. The woman who'd stood on a dark street with 2 men trying to break her and hadn't broken. He told her about the arranged marriage first, his father's ultimatum. The political structure of what would happen to him if he refused the severing of access, the erasure of everything he'd built, the transfer of power to people who had less interest in maintaining the careful lines his father, still, at least, observed. She listened without interrupting. "So you need a reason," she said when he finished. "I need a visible reason. Someone credible. Someone whose presence in my life makes the arranged marriage impossible to force without causing a public incident that damages both families. You want a fake girlfriend. For 6 months. Because you can't just say no to your father. I can say no, I have said no. The consequence of saying no is losing 8 years of work and leaving the organization in the hands of people who are significantly less careful than I am." He paused. "That's not modesty. That's an accurate assessment of what happens to the people around it if I'm removed." Naomi looked at him. "And you thought I'd be good for this because you're exactly the kind of choice my father would never accept as a calculated political move. Because you're not connected to anyone in our world. Because you have no leverage to use against me and no interest in acquiring any." He stopped. "And because you're the only person who has ever walked into a room with me and not behaved like they were afraid of what I'd do." A silence. In the kitchen, Maya was singing something under her breath, and the sound of water running meant she'd found the pots. 6 months, Naomi said. 6 months, your father's debt erased. Maya's education fully funded tuition, housing, everything. Security for both of you, for the duration. He paused. When it ends, you walk away clean, no strings, no obligations. And Maya doesn't get pulled into any of this. She doesn't know what it really is. Agreed. And if things get complicated, you have my number. Directly. Not through intermediaries. She looked at him for a long time. He'd gotten better, over the years, at reading the calculations people were running, but hers were harder to track than most. Because she'd built the kind of face that didn't telegraph what was happening underneath it until she was ready to let it through. I have conditions, she said. Tell me. It's a business arrangement. That's all it ever is, no matter what it looks like publicly. Understood. I don't move in here. I don't change my life. I show up when you need me visible, and I go home. We can discuss the security logistics of... Those are my conditions. He looked at her. Agreed, he said. She nodded once. Looked toward the kitchen, where Maya was now loudly debating with herself about whether there was enough green onion. Then she looked back at him with something in her eyes that was not trust, not yet, and maybe not ever, but was at least the structural frame that trust would need if it were ever going to be built here. 6 months, she said. 6 months, he confirmed. Neither of them knew yet how badly they were both about to miscalculate. The arrangement began with a contract. Not a literal one Tae-jun had offered, and Naomi had said she didn't sign documents with men she'd known for 48 hours, which was practical enough that he'd let it go, but a set of terms they'd both agreed to verbally. In the kitchen of his Gangnam penthouse, while Maya ate ramyeon at a counter that probably cost more than their combined monthly income, and chatted with Dongwook about the best neighborhoods for street food with the total lack of social fear that Tae-jun was beginning to understand was simply a Carter family trait. The terms were straightforward. Naomi would appear at events when required. She would behave publicly, like a woman who had chosen Kang Tae-jun of her own free will. She would not discuss the arrangement with anyone outside it. In exchange, debt erased, Maya's education secured. Security maintained for both of them for the duration. Simple. Clean. Professional, that was the theory. The first event was a dinner at a private club in Cheongdam-dong, 2 weeks after the arrangement began. Old money. The kind of room where people had known each other for 3 generations and could tell the difference between a woman who belonged and a woman who was being used to make a point. Naomi wore a dress she'd borrowed from a colleague who did high-end event work and had better access to emergency wardrobe than most boutiques. It was dark green and fit her well, and she'd looked at herself in the mirror before leaving her apartment with the flat assessment of someone who was checking a variable, not seeking validation. Maya had sat on the bathroom counter, watching her get ready, and said, "You look like money." Good, that's the goal. Is this weird? Naomi had looked at her sister in the mirror. Which part? All of it. The crime boss part. The fake girlfriend part. The security team that's been parked outside our building for 2 weeks part. It's temporary. You keep saying that like it'll start feeling true. Naomi had turned and pointed at her. Do your homework. Maya had pointed back. Don't fall in love with a criminal. The conversation had been almost funny at the time. Tae-jun met her in the lobby of his building before the dinner, which was the agreed handoff point, and he looked at her the way he looked at most things quickly, comprehensively, and then not at all, because he had already gathered whatever information he needed, and further looking would be something other than assessment. Except he looked a second time. He didn't comment on it. She didn't acknowledge it. They got in the car and Dong-wook gave them a 3-minute briefing on who would be at the dinner, what alliances were currently active, and what the correct behavior for each pairing would be. And Naomi listened, with her hands folded in her lap, and asked 2 clarifying questions that were so precisely targeted that Dong-wook glanced at Tae-jun with an expression that said he was mildly impressed, which for Dong-wook was the equivalent of a standing ovation. "You've done your homework," Tae-jun said. "I looked up the guest list." "How did you get the guest list?" "Your assistant sent it when she confirmed the car time." She glanced at him. "Did you tell her not to?" He had not told her not to. He'd also not told her to, which meant his assistant, a woman named Cha Yoon-hye, who had worked for him for 4 years and had opinions she expressed exclusively through the precision of her administrative decisions, had made a judgment call that Naomi Carter should be treated as a principal, not a prop. He filed that away and said nothing. The dinner itself was a performance, and Naomi understood performance, the way people did when they'd spent years in rooms where they were invisible. She understood exactly how much effort the people running the performance put into making it look effortless, and she replicated that effort with an accuracy that surprised him. She didn't overdo it. That was the thing. The women he'd been presented with over the years, potential arranged partners, strategic companions, the various calculated choices his father had paraded through his life, they overdid it. They performed warmth or deference or sophistication at a volume that the room could read as performance. Naomi sat next to him and was simply there, present and self-contained, responding to conversation when it came to her with the directness she applied to everything, and the effect was that the room couldn't quite place her, which meant the room kept looking. He found he didn't like the room looking. He found this reaction before he could stop it. The man who looked the longest was Lee Byung-chul, 61, textile industry on the surface, and something significantly less clean underneath it. A contemporary of his father's who had never liked Tae-jun, for reasons that had less to do with Tae-jun specifically and more to do with what Tae-jun represented, the new generation, the careful operator, the man who insisted on lines that the old guard thought were weakness dressed up as principle. Lee Byung-chul looked at Naomi for the better part of dinner with the particular expression that men like him wore when they were deciding what category something fit into. And the category he was building toward was apparent enough that by the time the main course arrived, Tae-jun was holding his fork with enough tension to be structural. Then Lee leaned across the table and said to no one in particular, but directed specifically at the space between Tae-jun and Naomi, "Interesting choice, Tae-jun. Your father must be very understanding." The table went quiet, the way tables went quiet when someone said a thing everyone had been thinking, but had the sense not to say. Naomi set down her water glass. Tae-jun started to speak. "I'm sorry," Naomi said, and her voice was pleasant and precise, and had an edge underneath it like something you didn't notice, was sharp until after you'd touched it. "I didn't catch the second half of that." "What is it you're saying? My presence requires understanding for." Lee blinked. He hadn't expected to be answered directly. People in these rooms didn't answer directly. That was the entire grammar of the space, everything said at an angle, received at an angle, declined at an angle. Naomi didn't speak at angles. "I only meant because it sounded like you were implying something." She picked up her fork. "About me, or about him, or about the two of us together. And I'd rather you said it, plainly, if you're going to say it, because I'm not very good at pretending I didn't understand something I understood perfectly well." The silence lasted 4 seconds, which in that room was geological. Lee Byung-chul smiled the way men smiled when they'd been caught, and chosen to reframe it as amusement. "Spirited. Thank you," Naomi said, and went back to her meal. Tae-jun said nothing. He looked at his plate. Something was happening in his chest that he couldn't immediately categorize. It was adjacent to pride, but pride implied ownership, and he didn't own anything about her. So it was something else, something without a clean name, and he disliked very much that it was there. Under the table, he became aware that his hand had moved without instruction to the edge of the table nearest her, and he moved it back. In the car afterward, she was quiet for the first 5 minutes. "You didn't have to handle it yourself," he said finally. "I know. I was going you were." She looked out the window. "That's why I did it first." He turned toward her. "Explain that." She looked at him. "Because if you'd handled it, it would have been about protecting me. Which makes me the thing being protected. Which means everyone in that room files me under a specific category, and I spend the next 6 months being managed instead of being present." She looked back out the window. "I handle my own conversations." He studied her profile. "Even when the conversation is with someone who can make things difficult for us. Especially then. Lee Byung-chul is connected to your father's third-tier distribution network and currently negotiating a partnership your father needs more than Lee does, which means Lee is someone your father is working to keep comfortable, which means I probably just made your life more complicated." She paused. "You're welcome to tell me I was wrong. He wasn't." "You did your homework on him too," he said. "I did homework on everyone on that list." "Why?" She turned to look at him again, and something in her expression was tired in a way that had nothing to do with the hour. "Because I am a black woman from Chicago in a room full of Korean crime families, and just be yourself is the worst advice anyone has ever given a person in that situation. So I prepare, that's what I do. I prepare, and I show up, and I handle what comes." She looked back out the window. "It's not a special skill, it's just what's required." The car moved through the city. Tae-jun sat with what she'd said and didn't try to respond to it because there wasn't a response that wouldn't be smaller than the thing itself. He thought about Lee Byung-chul's face when she'd answered him. The fraction of a second before the smile, when something had moved through his expression that was not quite surprise and not quite recalculation, but was the specific moment when a man who had underestimated something understood that he'd made that error. Tae-jun had seen that look on the faces of men across negotiating tables for years. He had never, until now, seen it and felt what he felt watching it happen. His father called the next morning at 7:45. Tae-jun was at his desk, already 2 hours into the day, when the call came through on the private line that Ikilsu used when he wanted the conversation to exist in a space without intermediaries. "I heard about the dinner. Then you heard it went well. I heard you brought her publicly for the first time." A pause. "I also heard she spoke to Byung-chul directly." "She did." "That was unnecessary." She disagreed. Another pause. Longer this time. His father used pauses the way other men used volume, as weight, as pressure, as a reminder of what patience in a man with power actually looked like. "Tae-jun, you understand what this appears to be. It appears to be exactly what I said it was. Someone I've chosen. You've chosen her to make a point. I've chosen her. Don't." His father's voice dropped a register, just slightly. "Don't make the point and then fall into the argument. This was supposed to buy you time. I am giving you time. What you're describing is a different thing. I'm not describing anything. You brought her to Cheongdam-dong. You let her speak for herself in a room where speaking for yourself is a declaration. Do you know what you've done? I've had dinner. You've drawn a line." Another pause. "And I will hold you to the consequences of that line." The call ended. Tae-jun set the phone down and sat with his father's last sentence, which was not a threat in the traditional sense. Threats named specific consequences. This was something more precise. A reminder that the game had rules and that he had just moved a piece in a way that couldn't be taken back. He thought about calling Naomi to tell her that the dinner had complicated things. He didn't, because telling her would require him to explain the specific nature of what was now complicated. And explaining that would mean admitting that his father had noticed something in his behavior at the dinner that Tae-jun himself wasn't sure how to categorize. He went back to work instead. The complication with Maya surfaced 12 days later, and it didn't come from his family. It came from the debt. The men who had cornered Naomi in Mapo district worked for a creditor named Park Sung-jin, mid-level operator in a rival network, not significant enough to be a player but connected enough to be persistent. The debt itself, roughly 40 million won, compounded from her father's borrowing through a network of informal lenders who had since sold the paper across 3 organizations, had been neutralized by Tae-jun's intervention within the first week of the arrangement. Or it should have been. What Dong-wook brought to him on a Tuesday afternoon was evidence that Park Sung-jin had not received the message through the proper channels, because the proper channels had a break in them. Because someone inside Tae-yun's own network had decided for reasons that were not yet clear not to pass the message along. Which meant Park Sung-jin still thought the debt was active. Which meant Park Sung-jin's people had been watching Naomi's building. Which meant they had, 2 days ago, followed Maya from the language academy. Dong-wook delivered this information with his usual controlled neutrality, which was the professional version of saying, "This is a problem." Tae-jun's response was not neutral. He called Naomi. She picked up a second ring. He could hear from the ambient sound that she was between shifts somewhere, the particular quality of a back hallway in a service environment. Slightly echoey, low background hum. "I need you to go get Maya from school right now." A beat. What happened? Not a question. A demand. "Someone followed her 2 days ago. She's not in immediate danger, but I need her moved to a different location while I resolve the minus." 2 days ago. Her voice had gone very quiet. That specific quiet. "You're telling me this now. I found out an hour ago." An hour ago. The ambient sound shifted. She was moving. And the people who followed her, are they the same people from Mappo? Yes. The people you said you'd handled. There was a communication failure in my Tae-jun. She said his first name for the first time, and it stopped him completely. Not because it was warm. Because it wasn't. Because it was the sound of a woman who had trusted a structural promise and was now standing on the side of a bridge where the cable had snapped. I told you. I told you the one thing. Before everything else. Before any of it. Maya doesn't get pulled into this. She hasn't been harmed. She was followed. Her voice cracked at the edge of the word, and then reassembled. She's 17, and she was followed home by men who collect debts for a living. And she doesn't know that because she doesn't know any of this is real because we decided she wouldn't have to know because you said she would be safe. He didn't have a response that wasn't insufficient. "I'm getting her," Naomi said. "My security team is closer." "I'm getting her." The call ended. He was at the language academy when she arrived. He hadn't planned to be. He'd sent Dong-wook ahead as protocol and then found himself in the car heading the same direction, for reasons he didn't fully examine. Naomi's car, a shared ride service, because she didn't drive in Seoul, hadn't gotten around to it, pulled up 3 minutes after his, and she got out before it had fully stopped, and crossed the sidewalk and went directly through the entrance without looking at him once. He followed at enough distance to not be in her way. Maya was in the front office. The academy had noticed a car circling twice during dismissal the day before, and had noted it in their security log, which Naomi had not been informed of, which was a failure in the communication chain that Tae-jun was going to trace and address, but not in this moment. In this moment, Naomi walked into the front office, and Maya looked up and read her sister's face and stood up immediately, because she'd spent enough years reading that face to know when it was carrying something heavy. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. We're going somewhere for a few days." "Naomi, pack whatever you need from your locker." "You've got 5 minutes." Maya looked past her at Tae-jun, who was standing in the doorway. Something moved across her face that was more sophisticated than he'd expected from a 17-year-old. Not fear, not confusion, but a specific calculation, like someone running a program and arriving at an answer they weren't sure they wanted. "It's the arrangement," Maya said. "Isn't it?" Something went wrong with the arrangement. Naomi turned to look at her. "I'm not stupid," Maya said quietly, without accusation. "I figured it out like 3 weeks ago. The security guys, the car, the way you talk about him, it's not the way you talk about someone you're actually dating. It's the way you talk about a problem you're managing." She looked at Tae-jun. Did someone try to hurt her? The silence lasted too long. "Maya," Naomi said, "they came after you in Mappo. Before all this started. I saw the bruise on your arm." Maya's voice was steady, and that was almost worse than if it hadn't been. "And now something's happened because of his people, and you're here, and I need to know what level of not safe we're dealing with, so I can actually help instead of being managed." Tae-jun looked at her. Then he looked at Naomi, because this was her call entirely. Naomi looked at her sister for a long moment. The fight to maintain the protective fiction was visible briefly, clearly visible, and then it left her face, and what replaced it was the specific exhaustion of a person who has been carrying 2 versions of a situation for too long. "Go get your things," she said. "I'll tell you everything in the car." She told Maya in the car. Tae-jun's cars were soundproofed for practical reasons, which meant he rode in the front with Dong-wook and heard nothing of what passed between the sisters in the back, and he decided that was the correct arrangement and did not look back. When they arrived at the penthouse, Maya got out and stood on the sidewalk for a moment looking at the building. She wasn't crying. She had the same quality of stillness her sister carried, like something moving very fast in a contained space. 4 months, she said. Maya, you've been doing this for 4 months, and I didn't know. She looked at Naomi. Not accusatory. Something more complicated. I could have been helping. You're 17. I'm not a child. You're my child, Naomi said, and it came out rougher than she'd intended, the particular rawness of someone saying a true thing they haven't said out loud before. You're the thing I'm responsible for. You don't get to help with this. That was the entire... She stopped, put her hand over her mouth briefly, pulled it back down. That was the entire point. Maya looked at her for a long moment. Then she walked past her, toward the building entrance, and at the door she stopped and looked back at Tae-jun, with an expression that was 17 years old and 40 years old, simultaneously. If you get her hurt, she said, I will dedicate the rest of my life to being a problem for you. Tae-jun held her gaze, understood Maya went inside. Tae-jun stood on the sidewalk with Naomi, who was looking at the entrance with her arms crossed over her chest. Not for warmth, the posture was structural, like she was holding something together from the outside. She meant that, Naomi said. I know, so did I. Back in Mappo, when I said anything happens to her. I know. She turned to look at him, and the thing in her face was not the controlled professional distance she'd maintained for 4 months. It was past that. It was the layer underneath, the thing that stayed up late and couldn't afford to be visible during the day. How did it break down, she said, the communication? How does a network run by someone like you have a breakdown like that? He told her the truth, that someone inside his organization had not passed the directive through, that he didn't know yet whether it was negligence or intention, that he was going to find out. Intention, she said immediately. Possibly, not possibly. Someone inside your organization wanted those men to still think the debt was active, wanted them to keep watching us. She looked at him. The question is who that serves and who it's connected to. He looked at her. You've been thinking about this since the car ride, he said. I've been thinking about this since I found out an hour ago. Yes. She uncrossed her arms. Looked at the building entrance. Your father knows about the dinner. He knows about the public line it drew, and someone in your organization didn't pass a directive through. She paused. How much does your father know about how your network operates internally? Everything Tae-jun did not say, because he knew the second he said it out loud, it would stop being a possibility and become a fact. And facts had weight that possibilities didn't yet carry. Come inside, he said instead. She looked at him for a moment, like she was going to push it. Then she looked at the building again, where Maya was already upstairs, probably interrogating the heated floors about their life choices. We need to talk about what comes next, she said. We do. The whole thing. Not just the security, the whole arrangement. What your father's actually willing to do, and what we're going to do about it. He nodded. And Tae-jun. She said his name again, and this time it was different from the bridge-careful sound. In the phone call it was steadier, more deliberate, like someone choosing to use a word they'd been keeping at a distance. I need you to stop managing information before you give it to me. If something happens that affects me or Maya, I find out when you find out. Not an hour later. Not after you've decided what I should know. He looked at her. The night air was cold between them. Agreed, he said. She nodded once, went inside. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment after the door closed, and Dong-wook came to stand beside him with the patience of a man who had been in enough versions of this situation to know when the boss needed a second. The communication gap, Tae-jun said. Who was in the chain? Dong-wook named 3 people. Tae-jun named the one it was. Dong-wook didn't confirm it verbally. He didn't have to. The slight pause before he said, I'll look into it tonight, was confirmation enough. Don't look into it, Tae-jun said. Just tell me when you're certain. And then, Tae-jun looked at the building entrance where Naomi had just disappeared. And then, we'll have a different conversation, he said. The gala was 3 weeks later, and it was his father's idea. Not a direct suggestion. Il-soo didn't make direct suggestions when indirect pressure could accomplish more. What he did was accept an invitation from the Hansung Foundation, a cultural charity event at the Grand Hyatt, 800 guests. The full architectural structure of Seoul's legitimate and semi-legitimate power in one room, and ensure that Tae-jun's attendance was assumed. Publicly, conspicuously assumed, in the way that things became assumed when the Kang family confirmed them to the right people. The implication was clear: bring the woman, or don't come. And if you don't come, that's its own statement. Tae-jun told Naomi about it over lunch at his penthouse, which had become by increment, by the slow logistics of the arrangement, the default location for conversations that required privacy. She came 3 times a week now. It hadn't started that way. It had started as once, and then twice when the security situation required more coordination, and then 3 times, which was when Tae-jun had stopped counting and simply acknowledged the pattern as a pattern. Your father's staging it, she said. Yes, he wants to see us in a room where he controls the variables. He wants to see if what Lee Byung-chul told him about the dinner is accurate. Which was. Tae-jun looked at his coffee, that it didn't look like a political arrangement. A pause. Naomi turned her water glass on the table. A small rotation twice. He'd noticed she did this when she was processing something she wasn't ready to respond to yet. And was he wrong? She said. Tae-jun looked at her. The question sat between them with a weight that neither of them moved to pick up for a long moment. It looked like what it was, he said finally, which is a credible performance. She looked at him. The water glass stopped rotating. Okay, she said, okay, I'll be there. The Grand Hyatt ballroom held 800 people and felt like it held 8,000. Naomi had worn something new this time, not borrowed, not emergency. She had spent an afternoon at a department store in Myeongdong making a choice, which was itself a shift from the position she'd maintained for the first 3 months of the arrangement. The position that said, don't invest in the appearance, because investing in the appearance means you're investing in something with a 6-month expiration. She hadn't examined the shift. She'd bought the dress, which was the color of dark plum, and she'd paid for it with her own money, and she'd told herself it was a professional decision. Tae-jun saw her in the lobby and went very still for a half-second. She saw him see her and made no acknowledgement of it, because acknowledging it would require them both to do something with it, and neither of them was prepared to do that. They entered the ballroom together. The room's response was something you could feel before you could see it, a recalibration, the slight shift in attention that moved like weather through a crowd when something entered that hadn't been fully anticipated. She felt it on her skin, the way she always felt it in rooms like this, and she made the decision she always made. Let it pass through her. Don't carry it. Tae-jun's hand found the small of her back. It was the first time he'd touched her beyond the necessary logistics of a public appearance, the offered arm, the brief guiding contact at entrances. This was different. This was the hand of someone who had forgotten, for 1 second, that he wasn't supposed to make that choice. She didn't move away, she should have. It would have been the correct operational decision. She didn't. Kang Il-soo was across the room, and she recognized him immediately from the photographs she'd studied. A compact and carefully composed man in his mid-60s, who had the specific stillness of someone who had decided long ago that display was for people who weren't certain of their own power. He looked at them from 30 feet away, and he did not smile, and he did not frown, and his expression did not change at all, which was more information than either of those responses would have been. Your father's watching, she said quietly. He's been watching since we walked in. What's he seeing? Tae-jun's hand was still at the small of her back. I don't know. She almost said, I think he's seeing the same thing Lee Byung-chul saw. She almost said, I think whatever you're telling yourself this is, your father has already categorized it as something else. She almost said, one of us needs to be honest about what's happening here, or we're going to make decisions based on story that stopped being accurate. She said none of those things, because the man from the corner arrived. His name, she would learn later, was Oh Hyun-woo, 43, construction industry, a business associate of Il-soo's with the particular social confidence of a man who had spent years in rooms with powerful people and mistaken proximity to power for the possession of it. He came to greet Tae-jun, stayed for the conversation, and then turned to Naomi with a smile that traveled from her face downward and back up in a way that was designed to be deniable, but wasn't. Where did Tae-jun find you? He said, in Korean, which she spoke well enough to understand and not well enough to answer fluently, which he had possibly assessed and possibly intended. She answered in English, he didn't find me, I found him. Oh Hyun-woo blinked. switched to English, which was accented but proficient. Is that right, persistent woman? Self-directed, she said. Different thing. He smiled. It was the smile that men wore when they thought a woman was being charming, without realizing she was being precise. And what is it you do, Miss Carter? Miss Carter. When you're not accompanying Tae-jun to events, the word accompanying landed like a deliberate choice. Accompanying, not beside, not with. Accompanying, which was the word for staff, for decorative functions, for things that didn't have independent status in the conversation. She looked at him. Then something happened that she hadn't anticipated. Tae-jun cut across the conversation entirely. She runs operations. He said it the way he said things, when the statement was not an invitation for follow-up flat, final, carrying a specific authority that had nothing to do with volume. For the Busan logistics pilot I've been developing. She's been overseeing the coordination infrastructure for the last 2 months. This was not true. She had been consulted informally on several logistical questions because she had a better instinct for operation sequencing than he did, and he'd asked her opinion twice, which she'd given because she couldn't not answer, a practical question put directly to her. Those conversations had not been a professional arrangement. Oh Hyun-woo processed this, reassessed, recalibrated his expression. I see. I wasn't aware. There's no reason you would be, Tae-jun said. Oh Hyun-woo excused himself within 90 seconds. She waited until he was out of earshot. Operations, she said. Tae-jun didn't look at her. You do run operations. You've been running mine for 2 months without a title. I've given you my opinion twice, 4 times. And you were right each time. He finally looked at her. Was the word inaccurate? She opened her mouth, closed it. That's what I thought, he said. Across the room, Kang Il-soo was no longer watching them. He had turned to speak with someone, a deliberate pivot, the kind of social movement that was its own message. I've seen what I needed to see. The thing was, she'd seen it too. She just hadn't decided yet what to do with it. The leak happened 6 days later. She was on a shift at a hotel in Yeouido when her phone started going. First 1 notification, then 3, then a cascade, that she registered as a different category of event before she'd even looked at the content, because the specific pattern of multiple alerts in rapid succession from multiple apps simultaneously meant one thing: something had become public. She stepped into the service corridor and looked at her phone. Her face was on 2 different news sites, her old neighborhood in Chicago. Her father's name attached to the debt figure, a photograph of Maya coming out of the language academy, taken from a distance, which meant it had been taken by someone with a specific intent at a specific time. The caption on one of the articles called her a calculated move. Another called her a woman with debts who had positioned herself near wealth. The one that put ice directly into her bloodstream, had Maya's school name in the headline. She stood in the service corridor and breathed. Her phone was ringing. Tae-jun, she answered. I know, she said before he could speak. I'm looking at it. I'm finishing my shift. Naomi, I have 40 minutes left and I'm not walking out on a shift because someone published a smear campaign. Her voice was steady. She would deal with what was underneath the steadiness later, in private, where no one could see it. Send the car for Maya first. Get her out of school and somewhere the press can't access. A pause. Already done. She's been picked up. She closed her eyes briefly. Okay. I need you to come here when your shift ends. I'll come. And I need you to know he stopped. Started again. This came from inside, not from the rival networks. From inside my family's organization, she'd known that. She'd insisted the second she'd seen the photograph of Maya, because the angle and the timing placed the photographer at a point that would require prior knowledge of Maya's schedule, which had not been widely known, which meant whoever had done this had access to information that had moved through Tae-jun's own channels. Your father, she said. A silence. I don't know yet, he said, which was different from saying no. She finished her shift. She went to the penthouse. Maya was already there, cross-legged on the couch with her phone screen lit and an expression that was trying very hard to be okay and was partially succeeding. Naomi sat beside her, and Maya leaned into her shoulder without a word, and they stayed like that for 2 minutes before Naomi straightened and looked at Tae-jun, who was standing across the room with the specific expression of a man who has just understood the full dimension of the thing he's responsible for. I want to leave Seoul, she said. Me and Maya. Tonight. He looked at her. I know, she said. I know the arrangement isn't finished. I know the debt, the funding, everything you've put in. I know what walking away costs. I'm telling you what I want. Not what I'm doing, what I want. Tell me what you're doing, he said quietly. She looked at Maya, then back at him. And the thing that crossed her face was the thing that happened when a person who had spent years making decisions from necessity instead of desire finally ran out of the energy to pretend that necessity and desire were the same thing. I'm staying, she said, because running doesn't fix it. And because she stopped, looked at her hands. Because I need to know who did this. And I think I have a right to be in the room when you find out. Tae-jun held her gaze for a long moment. You do, he said. Neither of them said what they both knew, that the moment she said she was staying, not because the contract required it, not because the terms demanded it, but because she had chosen it, the 6-month business arrangement had become something neither of them had a clean word for anymore, and there was no version of what came next that looked like walking away clean. The point of no return didn't announce itself, just arrived, quiet as a closed door, and by the time either of them noticed it, they were already on the other side. The name came back as Shin Jun-ho, Jun's oldest friend. The man who had sat across from him at his father's table since they were 12 years old. The man who had stood beside him at his grandfather's funeral, who had been the first call Tae-jun made the night. His father gave him his first real position in the organization, who knew every version of Tae-jun that had existed, before the version that the rest of the world saw. Dong-wook put the file on the desk at 6:47 in the morning, 3 days after the leak, and stood back with the expression of a man delivering something he wished he didn't have to deliver. Tae-jun looked at the file. He didn't open it immediately. He looked at it, the way you looked at something you already knew the shape of before you saw the contents, the way you looked at a door you were about to open that you couldn't unopen. Then he opened it. The communication chain was documented with the clean precision of Dong-wook's best work. The directive to neutralize the debt collection, the order that had not been passed through to Park Sung-jin's network, moved through 3 people before reaching Shin Jun-ho, who was the 4th in the chain and whose job it had been to confirm outward to the contact point. The confirmation had never gone out. The log showed Jun-ho had received the directive at 14:23 on a Tuesday afternoon, and the confirmation timestamp, which should have followed within the hour, was absent. Not delayed, absent. The leak was more direct. A data point from Naomi's security file, Maya's school schedule, which had been compiled internally and shared with exactly 6 people, of whom Jun-ho was one, had moved to a journalist via a messaging platform that Jun-ho used for personal communication, through an account that had been cleaned but not thoroughly enough. Dong-wook had found the ghost of it in 48 hours. Tae-jun closed the file. He sat for a moment with his hands flat on the desk. Where is he now? He said, his apartment in Yongsan. He's been home since last night. Is he aware that we know? I don't believe so. Tae-jun nodded once. Give me an hour. Dong-wook left without another word. Tae-jun sat in the hour and did not make calls, and did not review documents, and did not do any of the things he normally did with an hour in the early morning. He sat with 23 years of history and a file folder, and the specific silence of a man trying to locate something grief, rage, the clean edge of betrayal, and finding that what was actually present was something more complicated and therefore worse. He had known Jun-ho since before he understood what his family was. That was the particular damage of it. The knowledge had arrived alongside everything else: the organization, the weight of his father's expectations, the gradual understanding of what it meant to be the Kang heir. But Jun-ho had been there before all of it, which meant the betrayal reached back further than any other betrayal could. He picked up his phone and called Naomi. She answered in 2 rings. He could tell from her voice she hadn't slept. Tell me. I know who it was. Who? Shin Jun-ho. Silence. Then your friend, the one who... Yes. Another silence. Longer. She was doing the thing she did when she was processing something she wasn't ready to respond to. He knew the shape of it now, the particular texture of her pauses. Are you sure? Dong-wook is sure, which means I'm sure. Okay, her voice was careful, not soft careful. The distinction mattered. What are you going to do? I'm going to talk to him. Tae-jun, I need to hear it from him. She was quiet for a moment. I want to be there. He had expected this. He had also already decided his answer. No, he leaked my life. My sister's life. You have every right. And you're not going to be in that room, because if you are, it becomes about something other than what I need it to be about. A pause. He could feel her not agreeing with this. If something's wrong, she said finally, I mean if the situation, nothing will happen to me in a room with Jun-ho. He doesn't have the stomach for direct action. That's why he used other channels. He paused. I'll call you when it's done. She didn't say okay. She said, I'll be here, which was its own kind of answer, and then the call ended. Jun-ho opened the door in a gray shirt and bare feet, a coffee cup in one hand, and his face did the thing it did when it was confronted unexpected, a rapid sequence of micro-expressions, each one a failed cover for the one underneath, and what was underneath, for just 1/2 second before the composure arrived, was something that looked almost exactly like relief. That was the thing Tae-jun would carry afterward, that half second of relief, as if Jun-ho had been waiting for this, as if the anticipation of being found out had become worse than the discovery itself. Tae-jun. He stepped back from the door. I didn't know you were... I know. Tae-jun walked past him into the apartment. It was a good apartment. Jun-ho had always lived well, not at Tae-jun's level. Nobody outside the top tier of the organization did, but, well, comfortably, in the way that came from 20 years of proximity to power without carrying its full weight. The apartment had good furniture and good light, and on the kitchen counter there were 2 coffee cups, one used and one waiting, and the waiting one stopped Tae-jun at the kitchen threshold. You have company coming, he said. Jun-ho had followed him in. He set his own cup down on the counter with a deliberateness that telegraphed the decision to match Tae-jun's control. A friend. Who? A pause. Someone from... Tae-jun turned to look at him. Sit down. Jun-ho sat. The control was slipping already the specific slide of a man who had prepared extensively for this conversation in the abstract and was discovering that the abstract version had left out the actual texture of looking at the person you'd betrayed while they looked back at you. Tae-jun put the file on the table between them. He didn't open it. He didn't need to. The fact of the file was sufficient. Jun-ho looked at it, looked at Tae-jun, looked at the file again. Tae-jun said. Jun-ho's jaw tightened. Tae-jun, how long have you been reporting to him? The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man deciding how much of the truth he could afford to give. Tae-jun had sat across negotiating tables for years, and he understood this silence in detail. Understood that whatever came next was not the whole truth, but was the version that Jun-ho had calculated was survivable. 8 months, Jun-ho said. 8 months. 4 months before the arrangement with Naomi. 4 months before Tae-jun's father's ultimatum at the family meeting. Which meant the reporting had started before any of it had started, at a point in time when Tae-jun had been building the Busan logistics project, and had been, as far as anyone around him could see, operating successfully and without any visible cracks. Why, Tae-jun said. Jun-ho looked at the table, because he asked me to. My father asked you. He came to me directly, not through the organization. Personally. He said the last word with a weight that meant something that being approached personally by Ilsu, outside the organizational structure, was its own category of thing, its own kind of pressure that didn't leave a man much room to say no without consequences he'd have to carry alone. Tae-jun understood this. He understood it, and it didn't move him. And the woman, he said, Naomi Carter, when I told you about the arrangement. Jun-ho didn't answer immediately. I told you about it in confidence. Tae-jun's voice stayed flat. I told you because you were the one person in my life I talked to without the filter. And you took what I told you back to my father within 48 hours. I had to. Jun-ho's voice finally broke through the control, not loudly, but with the specific pressure of someone who has been holding weight for too long. You don't understand what he told me. What he said would happen if I don't care what he threatened, you should. Jun-ho looked up. And the thing in his face now was not the relief anymore, and not the managed composure. It was something rawer, older. He told me he was going to move you out regardless. That the decision about the succession was already made. That the Busan project was already being evaluated as a reason to reduce your authority, not expand it. That he'd been building the case for months. He said if I cooperated, the people under you would be protected in the transition. That he wouldn't dismantle everything you'd built, just redirect it. Tae-jun looked at him. He used you, he said, to protect the people under me. I was trying to protect Stop. The word came out quiet and with so much weight that Junho stopped mid-sentence. You were trying to protect yourself. I know the difference. I've known you for 23 years. I know exactly what your altruism sounds like, and I know what it sounds like when you're covering your own position with someone else's language. Junho's mouth closed. The school schedule, Tae-jun said. Maya Carter. 17 years old. You gave that to a journalist. Junho looked at the table again. Your father said, that wasn't about the succession. That wasn't about the organization. That was a photograph of a child taken outside her school. His voice didn't rise. That was the thing about it. It didn't rise, and somehow that was the most terrifying version of the statement. Her sister raised her alone since she was 13. And you put her face in a tabloid to destabilize a position my father wanted destabilized. He paused. Tell me that was a political decision. The silence lasted a long time. I'm sorry, Junho said. And he meant it. Tae-jun could see that he meant it, which did not make it better. Genuine remorse and genuine damage were not mutually exclusive, and the damage had a name and a face and was currently, somewhere in his penthouse, trying to hold herself together because her sister had been photographed coming out of school by a man Tae-jun had trusted. Get out of Seoul, Tae-jun said. Junho looked up. What? Not tonight. Not in an hour now. He picked up the file from the table and put it back inside his coat. When I leave this apartment, your time starts. Whatever you can carry. Wherever you decide to go. I don't want a location. I don't want contact. I want you removed from the situation so completely that you're not a factor in any of the conversations that are coming next. Tae-jun, I can help you. If you're going to move against your father, you need people who understand the interior of the organization. Who know where I said get out. Junho looked at him for a long moment. He looked the way people looked when they understood that the conversation was over, that the relationship was over, that 23 years of shared history had arrived at a door that only had one direction through it. The second coffee cup, Tae-jun said, looking at the counter. Who is it for? Junho didn't answer. It doesn't matter, Tae-jun said. He walked to the door. At the threshold he stopped without turning around. I'm sorry his threats were credible enough that you believed them. I'm sorry I didn't build the kind of position around me that made you feel safe enough to tell me. Those things are true, and they don't change anything. He left. He called Naomi from the car. She picked up immediately. Well, it was Junho. He confirmed it. Your father directed it. Yes. A pause. Where is Junho now, leaving Seoul? You let him go. I did. She was quiet for a moment. He could feel her deciding whether to push that particular point, whether she had the right to push it, whether she wanted to. Okay, she said finally. I need to tell you something else. Go ahead. My father has been building a case to remove me from my position for at least 8 months. Possibly longer. The Busan Logistics Project was being evaluated as grounds for reducing my authority, not expanding it. He stopped. Which means the arranged marriage was never the actual objective. It was the visible pressure. The real plan was to make you spend 6 months defending your personal choices while he dismantled your operational base underneath you. She said it without hesitation, and the speed of it told him she'd already been thinking in this direction. So by the time the 6 months ended, regardless of whether you married Park Seo-yeon or not, you'd have nothing left to lead. Yes, a silence. He never needed the marriage, she said. He needed the distraction. Yes, and the arrangement with me. The leak. Maya's photograph accelerated the timeline. If the media exposure damaged my reputation and destabilized my position faster than the 8 months required, the transition could happen sooner. He paused. I was the distraction for my own dismantling. He heard her breath change on the line. Not dramatically, just a shift in the rhythm of it. I need you to come here, she said. Her voice was different now, not careful, not controlled. Stripped of the professional distance, down to something that was just her. Not for the arrangement. Just come here. He was already telling the driver to turn around. She opened the door before he knocked, which meant she'd been watching for the car. Maya was in her room. He could see the light under the door, the faint sound of something playing through headphones. Naomi had a habit, when she was working through something, of standing near windows, and she was near the window now, turned toward him as he came in. And she looked like someone who had spent the last 2 hours holding something that had gotten too heavy to hold alone. Sit down, she said, not an order, an offer. He sat on the couch. She sat across from him, on the other end, her legs pulled up, her arms around her knees, and for a moment they were just two people in a room at 9 in the morning, with the wreckage of someone else's plan spread out between them. "He's going to move on you now," she said. The leak was supposed to be quiet pressure. "You going to Jun-ho means he knows you know it was internal. Which means the subtle approach is over. Yes. How fast? I don't know. Fast enough that what I do in the next week will determine what I have left to work with." He looked at his hands. "The Busan project is legitimate. Not fully operational yet, but legitimate. If I can accelerate the independent financial base before he moves to freeze my access." "The accounts," she said. He looked at her. "He'll move on the accounts first. Before anything public, before any organizational announcement. He'll freeze your liquid access so you can't respond with resources." She said it the way she said everything practical directly, without drama. "That's what I'd do. Take away the tools first, then announce the construction." "How do you know that?" "Because it's what the debt collectors did. They didn't threaten first. They removed options first. Then they showed up." She looked at him. "Your father is a patient man. Patient men always secure the exits before they open the door." He stared at her. "How much can you move independently in the next 48 hours? She said. "Enough to fund the Busan operation fully. Not enough to maintain. Fund the Busan operation. Secure the independent structure first. Everything else is secondary." She unclenched her arms from her knees and sat forward. "Do you trust anyone inside the current organization? Anyone he hasn't already reached? 2 people, possibly 3. Contact them today. Not through organizational channels. Personally. Tell them what you're doing and give them the option to move with you before the transition happens. That's what you should have done 8 months ago, but you didn't know you needed to, so you're doing it now." She met his eyes. "I know it's not how your world works. I know the protocol is different. But protocol is built for a situation where the threat is external and your base is intact, and that's not the situation you're in." He sat with this. The thing about Naomi Carter, the thing he had been cataloging since the first night and had never been able to fully put somewhere, was that her intelligence didn't announce itself. It arrived sideways, in the operational efficiency of a woman who moved through hard rooms with minimum waste. In the questions she asked that were always slightly ahead of the conversation. In the way she described the tabloid leak not as a personal wound, which it was, but as a tactical move, which it also was, almost simultaneously. "You should be running something," he said. She looked at him. "What? Not for me. Your own something. Something that stopped." The sentence was larger than he'd intended it to be, and he could see her reading the edges of it. The Busan operation could use someone with your instincts at the operational level. Not as a favor, as a real position. She looked at him for a long time. "We're in the middle of your father trying to dismantle your life. I know, this is not the moment to offer me a job." "I know, then why are you doing it?" He didn't have an answer that was entirely professional, and they both knew it, and the fact that they both knew it and were sitting with it in the same room without moving away from it was its own kind of answer, the kind that couldn't be taken back after it was given. "Because," he said, "the 6 months end in 5 weeks. And I haven't been able to." He stopped. Tried again. "The arrangement was a business structure. I built it that way. I needed it to be that way. I know. And I don't know when it stopped being another stop." "Tae-jun." She said his name quietly. "I look at you," he said, and his voice had dropped to something he didn't use often, the register below the one he controlled, "and I lose track of what I was thinking. And when someone else looks at you the wrong way, I want to." He stopped hard. She was very still. "I know that doesn't." He looked at his hands. "I know that's not what this was supposed to be." "No," she said. Her voice was careful again, but differently careful than it had been in the professional months. Carefully honest. "It's not." They sat with that. "I'm not in a position to offer you something simple," he said. "I'm in a position where my father is about to take everything he can reach. My name, my accounts, my access to the organization I've spent 8 years building. In 5 weeks, the arrangement ends, and you have every right to take what was agreed and go, and I would not. I won't hold any part of this over you." "I know that," she said. "I'm telling you anyway." She looked out the window. The light of the morning was fully up now, Seoul doing its daily thing below them, indifferent and relentless. "The job," she said, "yes. Legitimate, real responsibilities. Real authority. Yes. Not contingent on anything else between us. No. She was quiet for a long moment. I'd need to think about it. I know. Because accepting it while all of this is happening, she gestured vaguely at the implied scope of it. Looks like a different kind of arrangement. And I don't want it to be that. It isn't. You know that. I know that. The rest of the world looks at us and sees something with an expiration date that got renegotiated when the terms became inconvenient. She turned to look at him. I'm not willing to be that story. He held her gaze. Then we changed the story. How? He opened his mouth to answer and the phone rang. Not his personal line. The organizational line. The one that Il-su's chief of staff used for formal communications from the family structure. He looked at it. Naomi looked at it. Answer it, she said. He did. The chief of staff's voice was professional, neutral, and carried the specific emptiness of a man reading from a decision that had already been made. He informed Tae-jun that effective immediately, pending a formal family council review, his signatory authority on all organizational accounts had been suspended. His access to 3 of the 5 companies under the family umbrella had been temporarily revoked pending review. The review would be conducted within 30 days. He was encouraged to cooperate fully. Tae-jun listened to the entire statement without interrupting. When it ended, he said, understood, and disconnected. Naomi was watching him. He moved, she said. He moved. The accounts, yes. How much is outside his reach? Some. Enough for Busan if I move in the next. He checked his watch. 12 hours. After that, I can't guarantee which channels he's already started closing. She stood up, uncurled from the couch with the decisive efficiency she deployed when the situation moved from analysis to action. Then we have 12 hours. What do you need first? He looked at her. You don't have to. I know I don't have to. She said it with the flat finality that meant the point was closed. What do you need first? Dong-wook needs to move funds through 3 separate legitimate channels before Il-su can freeze the secondary accounts. I need to contact 2 people inside the organization before the news of the suspension reaches them through official channels. And I need a lawyer who isn't connected to anyone in my father's network. I know a lawyer, she said. He blinked, Korean-American. She does in immigration and contract work. She's not connected to anyone in your world, and she's sharp. Naomi picked up her phone. She's not a criminal defense lawyer. I don't need criminal defense. I need corporate structure. Someone who can document the Busan operation as independent before my father tries to claim it as an organizational asset. She was already dialing. Her name is Christine Yoon. I'll tell her it's urgent. He sat on the couch and watched her and thought about how, in his entire adult life, in every room where things fell apart, he had been the one who stood up first. He had been the one who made the call, drove the response, rebuilt what broke. Not because he was the strongest person available, but because he had trained himself into the position of being the only option. And here was Naomi Carter, who had worked double shifts to support a teenager, who had walked into the study of his family's mansion and wrapped his hand with a hotel towel, who had told him she was too tired to be afraid of him, standing 3 feet away in the morning light calling a lawyer on his behalf, with the same focused efficiency she applied to everything she did. He looked at her, and something in the structure of what he'd been holding broke open in a way he could not immediately locate the edges of. He could not immediately manage or contain or reduce to a category. He looked at her, and he lost his mind. He saw at the edge of his vision the door to Maya's room open a crack, just enough for one eye to register the scene, just enough to take in her sister on the phone fin, Tae-jun on the couch, and the morning light, holding him, both in the specific intimacy of people who have stopped performing their arrangement, and then close again quietly, with the tact of a 17-year-old who had figured out enough. Christine, Naomi said into the phone, "It's Naomi. I know it's early. I need you to clear your afternoon. There's someone I need you to meet." A pause. "Yes. Today. It's urgent." She glanced at Tae-jun. "And Christine, make sure you're not going through any directories connected to the Kang family infrastructure. Any of them." Another pause. "I'll explain when I see you." "Thank you." She hung up, looked at him. 3 o'clock. Her office in Mapo. He nodded. "Call Dong-wook," she said. "Start the account transfers. I'll handle Maya, Naomi." She looked at him. He didn't have the words immediately. He was not a man who ran short on words. He had spent his adult life in rooms where the precise word, deployed at the precise moment, was the difference between outcomes, But standing at the edge of what he actually wanted to say, he ran short. "When this is over," he said. She waited. "When whatever version of over this reaches, I want to talk about what it's been. What it actually has been. Not the arrangement. Not the terms." He stopped. "I want to have that conversation with you, and I want it to be a real one." She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved through her face, complex, multiple, not reducible to a single name, and then settled into something quieter and more honest than anything she'd allowed herself in the months of careful, professional distance. "Ask me again," she said, "when we're on the other side of today." It wasn't yes. It wasn't no. It was the thing she did, turned a door without opening it all the way, left it at a crack, exactly enough light to know what was on the other side, without committing to crossing the threshold. He could live with that. He had learned in the last 4 months a great deal about what he could live with that he hadn't known before. He picked up his phone and called Dong-wook. What he didn't know, what neither of them knew, sitting in the penthouse with 12 hours and Christine Yoon's 3 o'clock and 2 people inside the organization to call before the news traveled, was that his father had already made one more move. That the account suspension was designed to cover. He had contacted Park Seo-yeon's family, not to reinstate the arranged marriage. That window had closed, and Il-soo was a man who understood which doors were permanently shut. He had contacted them to offer something else: documentation. Financial records, operational logs, a complete picture of Tae-jun's independent Busan development, the project Tae-jun had been building as his exit from the family empire, reframed as evidence of unauthorized diversion of organizational assets. If the Park family filed a formal complaint through their legal channels, the complaint would trigger a review that would take not 30 days but 6 months, during which Tae-jun's independent accounts would be frozen not by family order but by legal process. 6 months. The exact length of the arrangement, the exact window in which Naomi Carter's visa required her to demonstrate ongoing legitimate employment in Seoul. Employment that, if the Busan operation was frozen in legal review, she would no longer have. Il-soo had not targeted Naomi directly. He had targeted the structure around her, precisely and patiently, the way a man who controlled exits always moved not through the door, but around it, until the door opened on its own, because there was nowhere else to go. Tae-jun would find out about the Park family contact in 4 hours. By then, the 12-hour window would be down to 8. And the real question, the one that everything else had been building toward, without either of them fully seeing it, would no longer be whether he could save the Busan operation, or whether Naomi would stay, or whether his father could be stopped. The real question would be whether Tae-jun was willing to do the one thing his father had never believed he was capable of: step out of the shadow of the Kang name entirely, in public, in a way that could not be managed or reversed, and burn the bridge behind him so completely that the only direction left was forward. He was going to find out, in 4 hours, that the answer was yes. But first he had to find out that the question was real. Dong-wook called at 11:43. Tae-jun was in the middle of his second call to the organization's interior, a man named Baek Sung-min, who ran the legitimate shipping contracts under the family umbrella and who had, over 8 years, developed a loyalty to Tae-jun's operational approach that was quieter, and therefore more durable than the performative kind, when the second phone lit up with Dong-wook's name. He told Baek he'd call back in 10 minutes, switched lines. The Park family, Dong-wook said, no preamble. Il-soo contacted them yesterday evening. Not about the marriage. Tae-jun went still. He gave them documentation. Operational records from the Busan development, reframed as evidence of unauthorized asset diversion. If they file a formal legal complaint, the independent accounts get frozen by process instead of by family order. Tae-jun's voice was flat. 6 months minimum, yes, and Naomi's employment status would be contingent on an operation under legal review, which would not satisfy the visa employment requirement. The 12 hours had just become 8, and the 8 weren't clean hours, they were hours, during which his father was already moving through channels that Tae-jun couldn't directly access, building a legal architecture around him, with the patience of a man who had been preparing this particular structure since long before Tae-jun had understood the building was in progress. He looked at the time. 11:46. Christine Yoon's office at 3. He did the math. How long before the Park family files, he asked. If they move today, the complaint could be registered by end of business. If they wait, they won't wait. My father gave them the documentation and a timeline. They'll move before he can change his mind, or before I can create a counterposition. He stood up from the desk. Where's Naomi? Kitchen. She's been on the phone with her lawyer contact for the last 20 minutes. He walked to the kitchen. She was at the counter with her phone against her ear and a notepad in front of her, covered in the kind of notes that people took when they were processing complex information in real time, not full sentences. Fragments, arrows between concepts, circled words. She looked up when he came in and read his face immediately and said into the phone, "Christine, I need to call you back," and hung up before Christine could respond. "The Park family," Naomi said. He told her. She listened without interrupting, which was one of the things about her that he'd stopped noticing as remarkable, because it had become simply part of how she functioned. She let the full shape of a problem arrive before she started working on it. No interruptions to ask questions that would be answered by patience. No reactive responses that consumed energy before the picture was complete. When he finished, she looked at the notepad, then at him. "He's filing it through the Park family, so it looks independent," she said. "So you can't challenge it as a family action. You can only respond to it as a legal matter, which takes you out of the organizational space and into a court timeline that he controls the pace of." "Yes. What's the one thing that breaks that structure?" He looked at her. "Not legally," she said. "Legally takes too long." "What breaks it operationally? What's the move that takes the Park family complaint out of useful territory before they file?" He had been working on this since Dong-wook's call. He'd been working on it before he'd walked to the kitchen. Turning it over the way. He turned over problems that didn't have clean solutions, looking for the angle that wasn't a legal counter or an organizational maneuver, but something that operated outside the structure his father had built around him. The documentation he gave them, Tae-jun said. The operational records from Busan. If those records are already public, if the Busan operation is already registered as a fully independent corporate entity with publicly documented ownership and funding sources, then the complaint has nothing to stand on. You can't claim unauthorized diversion of assets from an operation that was never organizationally owned. How fast can you register it? Christine Yoon was going to help us do that at 3. It's not 3. It's 11:50. He looked at her. "Call Christine," she said. "Tell her we need her in the next hour." Not her office. Here if she'll come, or wherever she can see us fastest. She was already picking up her phone. "I'll call Dong-wook. We need the financial documentation for the Busan operation, everything that shows independent funding sources, ready to file before end of business today." "Naomi, call Christine," she said, and she was already dialing. Christine Yoon arrived at 12:35. She was 41, Korean-American, with the specific quality of a person who had spent 2 decades turning other people's crises into manageable structures and had long since stopped being surprised by what those crises looked like. She came in, shook Tae-jun's hand with the assessment of someone who had heard enough of the situation to know it was serious, set her bag on the table and said, "Show me what you have." Dong-wook had already sent the Busan documentation through encrypted channels. It was on the table in organized form: funding records, property agreements, contractor relationships, all of it carrying the fingerprints of a man who had been building something legitimate for 2 years, and had been careful enough about the boundary between family money and independent money that the line was traceable. Christine went through it with a speed that suggested she was reading at a level above her apparent pace. Her eyes moved faster than a casual review, but her questions, when they came, were precise enough to prove she'd absorbed everything. "The family organizational records your father gave the Park family," she said to Tae-jun. "Do you have access to them? I know what's in them. Could he have altered them? Added attributions that would make Busan appear organizationally funded?" Tae-jun paused. "He has access to the records. He controls the record-keeping infrastructure. If he altered them in the last, then the original documentation you have becomes a counter-record. If we file the independent registration today with your original funding documentation attached, any subsequent claim that the Park family makes has to explain why the publicly registered record contradicts their evidence." She looked at him. "It doesn't stop the complaint. It makes the complaint immediately contested, which slows its legal effect from weeks to months. In those months you operate. Can you file today? I need 2 hours and everything in this stack to be exactly what it looks like." She picked up a page. "Is it?" Yes. She looked at him for a moment with the expression of a lawyer who was asking a question that had significant professional implications for her own involvement. Completely. The Busan operation has been independently funded, independently contracted, and deliberately kept outside the organizational financial structure from its inception. I built it that way for this exact kind of contingency. I just didn't know the contingency would come this fast. Christine looked at Naomi. Naomi looked back at her. I know what I'm asking. You're asking me to file corporate registration documents under time pressure for a man whose father controls a criminal organization and who is currently being legally maneuvered by that father. I'm asking you to file legitimate documents for a legitimate business before illegitimate pressure can reframe them as something else. Naomi said it evenly. The documents are real. The business is real. The pressure is the only thing that isn't. Christine looked at the stack again, made a decision that was visible in the slight shift of her posture, the settling of someone who had chosen a position. I need you both out of this room for 2 hours. I work better without an audience. Tae-jun and Naomi went to the living room. Maya was still in her room. The light was still under the door. At some point in the last hour, she had turned the headphone music off, which meant she was listening to the apartment with the specific attention of a teenager who understood the stakes and had been told to stay out of it and was complying by the thinnest possible margin. Tae-jun sat on the couch. Naomi stood at the window. Neither of them spoke for a while. When Christine files, Naomi said eventually, without turning from the window, your father knows immediately that the quiet approach is over. Yes. What does he do? He accelerates. Whatever he was planning to do after the legal structure was in place, he moves it forward. He looked at his hands. He calls a formal family council. He makes the removal official. He strips the title, the organizational position, everything that carries the Kang name. And you. I walk out of it with Busan if the registration holds. And nothing else. She turned from the window. Is that enough? He thought about it honestly, which was different from the way he'd been thinking about it for the last 8 months when the Busan project had been a contingency rather than a plan. An honest answer required him to account for what enough actually meant, not in organizational terms, not in terms of the power structure he'd spent his adult life inside, but in terms of what a life was supposed to contain and whether the version of it available on the other side of today's filing was something a person could actually build from. Yes, he said, and meant it in a way that surprised him slightly. She looked at him for a moment. Then she sat down, not across from him, but on the same couch, one cushion between them. Close enough that the distance was a decision, not a default. My father, she said. Not his father, hers. When he died, we had nothing. My mother went 6 months before him. The accident took them at the same time, but it didn't. She lasted 6 months. In the hospital and then not. She was looking at her hands now. I had $23,000 in a savings account. Maya was 13, and I had a business admin degree I'd finished 2 years before that had gotten me one actual job in an office that paid me barely enough to cover the apartment and Maya's school supplies. He didn't speak. He understood she wasn't asking for a response. She was giving him something. The debt my father left, it wasn't recklessness. He'd borrowed to cover my mother's first round of treatment. Before the insurance approved the extended coverage. He thought it would be repaid in 6 months. She paused. It didn't get repaid, and then they were both gone, and the debt was mine because there was nobody else, and I couldn't let it go to collections because the collectors would have taken the apartment, and Maya would have had nowhere to go to school. So you carried it, he said. 4 years, she looked up. That's what was on that street in Mapo, not just the money. 4 years of carrying something that was never supposed to be mine, and 2 men who thought that, because my name was on the paper, they owned access to everything I'd built around it. He looked at her. I'm telling you this, she said, because what you're about to do, walking away from the Kang name, the organization, all of it, I know what that weight feels like when it's not yours and you've been carrying it anyway. And I know what it feels like when you put it down. She paused. It feels like losing something. Even when you know you should have put it down years ago. Even when putting it down is the only rational thing. It still feels like losing. He sat with that. I know, he said. And he did. He'd known it was coming since Dong-wook had put the file on his desk that morning. The name in the file was Junho, and the loss of Junho was the first piece of the structure falling, and this afternoon the rest of it would follow. And what he was trying to locate, what she'd just helped him locate, without performing the locating, was the difference between a loss and a release. After Christine files, he said, "I'm going to call my father." She looked at him sharply, not to negotiate, to tell him directly. Before he hears it through the legal filing, before his lawyers call him with the registration notice. "I'm going to call him and tell him what I've done and what I'm doing, and give him the opportunity to respond to me as a person instead of through organizational channels." He paused. "He won't take it, but I want to have made it." She was quiet for a moment. "Why? Because whatever he is, he's the only father I have. And whatever I do after today, I don't want to do it without having looked him in the eye, even by phone, and told him exactly where I stand." He looked at the window. "I'm not doing it for him. I'm doing it so that 20 years from now, I don't carry the question of whether I gave him the chance." Naomi was quiet for a long moment. "Okay," she said. "Okay. I'll be in the other room when you call. You don't need me there." "I know." But after she looked at him directly, "After the call, I'll be here." The one cushion between them had not moved. Neither had either of them. The afternoon held them there for a moment, two people at the edge of the thing they hadn't named, in a room where a lawyer was building a legal structure that would determine the shape of the next year, with a teenager behind a closed door, listening to the sounds of adults, deciding things that would determine the shape of her next decade. Then Christine knocked on the doorframe. "It's filed," she said. Tae-jun called his father at 2:57 in the afternoon. Il-soo picked up on the third ring. His voice was exactly what it always was, composed. Unhurried, the voice of a man who had already located his position before he chose to speak. "Tae-jun. The Busan operation is registered as an independent corporate entity as of 2:43 this afternoon," Tae-jun said. "Original funding documentation is publicly attached to the registration. The Park family complaint, if they file it, will immediately be a contested matter with no clean legal path." A silence, shorter than he'd expected. "You moved fast," Il-soo said. "I had help." "The woman." Another silence. Tae-jun could hear the sound of his father's office in the background, the faint ambient quality of a room he'd sat in hundreds of times. The particular acoustic signature of the space where his father had spent 30 years making the decisions that built the empire, Tae-jun was currently walking away from. "What do you want me to say?" Il-soo said. "Nothing. I'm not calling to negotiate. I'm calling to tell you directly, I'm done. Not with anger. Not with a list of grievances. I'm done with the organization, the succession, the name as it applies to what you've built. I'm going to build the Busan operation, and I'm going to build it clean, and I'm going to build it without anything that belonged to you. That's not as easy as it sounds. I know. You have no idea what the organization will look like from the outside once you're removed. What it will be willing to do to protect its interests when you're not inside it, moderating it. That's a threat. It's an observation." Il-soo's voice remained level. "I built something that is larger than either of us. It doesn't stop because you step away from it. It continues. And the people who take your position in it are not as careful as you've been. And the damage that causes is on you," Tae-jun said. "I spent 8 years trying to hold the careful line. I'm not going to spend the next 8 doing it for an organization that's been trying to dismantle me from the inside." A pause, longer this time. The girl Il-soo said, "The American." Tae-jun's jaw tightened. "You understand what you're choosing," Il-soo said. "Not abstractly, concretely. What it will look like. What they will say. I know what they'll say. She comes from nothing. She comes from the same place I came from," Tae-jun said. "She just didn't have the option of pretending otherwise." The silence after that was the longest. "I built everything you had," Il-soo said finally. His voice was different now, not threatening, not composed. Something older and more damaged. "Everything you stood on, every advantage you used to build, that Busan project, I built the ground under it. You're walking away from me with the tools I gave you." "Yes," Tae-jun said. "I am." He paused. "And if you'd given me the option to use those tools differently, to build something clean from inside the structure, I would have spent my life inside it. That was never on offer. I protected you. You controlled me. There's a version of those things that looks the same from the outside." Another silence. He could hear his father breathing. "Come to Seoul," Il-soo said. "Come to the house. In person. Before this becomes—" No, Tae-jun said it quietly. This is the conversation. This is me telling you directly, which is the respect you're owed. What happens after this is the legal and organizational process, and I'll handle that through the appropriate channels. He waited, Tae-jun. His father's voice had reached a register it almost never reached. Still controlled, but at the edge. At the place where control was a choice being actively made, rather than a natural state. Don't do this. He closed his eyes for a moment. I love you, he said. That's the truth, and it doesn't change anything I just told you. He ended the call. He sat in the quiet of his father's absence for 30 seconds. 40. The specific silence of a line that's been disconnected, the particular weight of a conversation that will be replayed, that will have to be replayed, because the things that last say themselves more than once. Then he put the phone down and walked back to the living room. Naomi was standing near the window again. When he came in, she looked at him and didn't ask how it went, because she could read how it went. In the particular quality of how he was carrying himself, she had gotten very good at reading him. He had noticed, better than almost anyone he'd known for years, better than people who had ostensibly known him longer. Christine needs you to sign the registration documents, she said. All right, he crossed the room. She stayed at the window. He stopped next to her. They stood side by side for a moment, looking at the city below, the middle afternoon light of Seoul doing what it did, indifferent, relentless, full of people who had no idea that a 23-year friendship had ended in a Yongsan apartment that morning, that an 8-year organizational career had ended on a phone call, that everything was different now in a way that would take years to fully understand. How are you? She said quietly. I don't know yet. She nodded. Ask me again tomorrow, he said. I will. He went to sign the documents. The press arrived at the building at 4:15. Not because of the filing that was too fast for the news cycle. It was the Park family, not the complaint which hadn't been filed yet, but someone adjacent to the Park family who had decided that the story of the Kang heirs' defiance was more valuable as a public narrative than as a private negotiation. 2 cameras, then 4. A reporter with a microphone who knew the building and knew Tae-jun's car. Dong-wook informed him via text. He read the text, looked at Christine Yoon, who was closing her briefcase with the careful efficiency of someone who had done what she came to do, and said, Can you go through the back? Of course. She paused. Tae-jun. She used his first name without the formal honorific, which was the first time. What you filed today, it's solid. If they contest it, they're contesting documentation that's been filed publicly with a timestamp that predates their complaint. That's not a losing position. I know, good. She looked at Naomi. I'll send my fee to the address you have. Thank you, Christine. She left through the service exit that Dong-wook arranged. Tae-jun stood at the window and looked at the cameras below. There were 6 now. Someone had clearly notified more than one outlet. His phone lit up, not his father, the family's chief of staff. He let it ring. Then a number he recognized as one of the organizational council's senior members. He let that ring too. Then Baek Sung-min, the shipping contracts man, the one he'd been trying to reach earlier in the day. He picked that one up. The council meeting, Beck said immediately. They're calling it for tomorrow morning. Emergency session. Tae-jun, I know. They're going to vote on the succession tonight in preparation. The vote is a formality. Your father has the numbers already. A pause. I can be there. I can put myself on record in opposition. It won't change the outcome, but it'll be documented. Tae-jun thought about Naomi's voice. You need people who understand the interior of the organization, who know where the levers are. Don't, he said. Not yet. I need you inside, Sung-min. I need one person inside who I can trust to tell me what's actually moving. Can you do that? A pause. Yes. The meeting tomorrow. Tell me what's said. Exactly. And then I'll know what I'm walking into the day after. He ended the call. Naomi had been listening from across the room. She came to stand beside him at the window again and looked at the cameras below. You can't stay in this building tonight, she said. If it's going to be public, this address becomes a story. They'll have cameras here until midnight. I know. Do you have somewhere else, he thought. The Busan site. There's a development office. Not finished, but livable. She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned to look at him with an expression that had moved beyond the careful professional distance and beyond the something unnamed of the past weeks into something that was simply direct, simply honest, the face she made when she had decided to say the real thing. Come to mind, she said. He looked at her. Not I have a couch. It's not glamorous. Maya will probably talk to you until 11 o'clock, because she has questions she's been storing for weeks. She looked back out the window. But it's not here and it's not Busan, and she stopped. It's somewhere where the cameras aren't. He stood in the particular silence of a choice that felt larger than its components. All right, he said. They left through the service exit at 5. Dong-wook drove. Maya sat in the back with her knees up and her phone down, which for Maya was the indicator of maximum seriousness. She looked at Tae-jun once when he got in the car, and then looked out the window and said, "So it's real now." The whole thing. "Yes," Tae-jun said. "What happens to him?" "Your father. He keeps the organization. He gets what he wanted. The formal succession moves to whoever he nominates." He looked at the passing city. "He wins." Maya was quiet for a moment. "Doesn't feel like winning." He looked at her. "Winning is when you get what you want, and it feels like what you thought it would," she said. "Getting what you planned for and losing your son in the same move," she shrugged. "That's just damage." He had no response for 17-year-old clarity, delivered in the back of a moving car. Naomi, who was in the front, didn't turn around. But he saw the corner of her mouth do something that wasn't quite a smile. The apartment was everything she'd said and everything she hadn't described. It was small and dense with the specific organization of a person who had never had excess space and had long since stopped apologizing for that. 2 bedrooms. A kitchen that was clearly used not decoratively, actually used with the marks of real cooking. A pan with a handle that didn't match, mismatched chairs at the table. Photographs on one shelf, her parents, the same 2 people from the locket, captured at various ages in a progression that showed them growing into themselves. Mayas at several stages of childhood. Naomi at what looked like graduation alone, holding the certificate with one arm, because the other arm had been around someone who wasn't there anymore. He stood in the living room and looked at all of it and felt something that was large enough and specific enough to have a name, though he wasn't ready yet to say the name out loud. Maya disappeared into the kitchen and emerged 20 minutes later with food that she placed on the table, without asking whether they were hungry. She sat down and started eating with the practical authority of the person who had cooked it, and Naomi sat across from her, and Tae-jun sat between them, and the 3 of them ate in a silence that was not uncomfortable. After a while, Maya said, "The camera's outside your building." "Yes. They're going to find this address eventually." "Probably. So what's the plan?" Tae-jun looked at her. "For tonight, there is no plan. Tonight is just tonight." Maya chewed, considered this. "Okay," she said. "I can work with that." Naomi looked at him across the table. The lamp above them was giving off a warm light that was different from the penthouse light, smaller, more human, less designed. She looked like herself in it. Not the woman who had performed composure in rooms full of criminal royalty. Not the woman who had managed the arrangement with the efficiency of someone running a complex operation. Just herself. He looked at her and felt the thing with no clean name expand in his chest until it was no longer something he could organize around. She looked back at him. Neither of them spoke. Maya looked between them with the expression of someone watching a scene she'd anticipated and had opinions about, and then she looked deliberately at her food and said nothing, which was the most sophisticated social decision she'd made in his presence. At 9:40, Baek Sung-min called. Tae-jun stepped outside to the small balcony that overlooked the street, a narrow strip of concrete with a Moa's plastic chair and a dying plant that was clearly Naomi's and was clearly not a priority. "The vote is tonight," Baek said, "not tomorrow." Il-soo moved it up. He wanted it done before the registration filing becomes news. "What's the margin?" 7-1. I was the one. "Thank you, Sung-min. There's more. A pause that had weight in it. The man they're naming in your place. It's not from the senior council. It's Park Seo-yeon's older brother." Tae-jun went still. "Il-soo isn't just merging the succession with the Park family," Baek continued. "He's transferring the entire operational-based Park control. Your name is erased from the organizational structure. Every project, every contract, every relationship you built in 8 years, transferred to Park family management by end of this month." 8 years. The Busan registration, Tae-jun said. Does he challenge it? Not directly. His lawyers advise that a direct challenge creates a public legal record that implicates the family in the transfer. He's letting it stand. But he's contacted every contractor and shipping relationship associated with Busan independently. offering them better terms to redirect their contracts to park management. So the legal structure was intact, and the operational structure was being hollowed out from underneath it. The Busan registration was a shell, a clean, legally sound, publicly documented shell. Without the contractor relationships, without the shipping agreements, without the people who had been willing to work with Tae-jun because of who he was inside the organization. Without any of that, the shell contained nothing. He stood on the balcony, with the cold air of Seoul in his face, and looked at the street below, and thought about 8 years of careful work being redirected, relationship by relationship, to a family whose management style he'd spent those 8 years quietly counterbalancing. Sungmin was still on the line. Tae-jun, I heard you. What do you want me to do? He thought about the thing Naomi had said that morning, about patient men securing the exits before they opened the door. He thought about his father in his office, building the structure of this for 8 months, maybe longer. He thought about the emergency council vote happening tonight, in a room he'd sat in hundreds of times, with men he'd known since childhood, and the particular quality of a door closing. Then he thought about Naomi inside the apartment, at the small table with the mismatched chairs and the lamp throwing human light over everything, looking at him the way she'd looked at him. Nothing tonight, he said. Stay inside. Watch what they do with the contractor contacts. Send me the names of anyone who agrees to redirect, and anyone who doesn't. He paused. The ones who don't, I'll call them myself tomorrow. That's a short list, I know. Tae-jun, it might be 3 or 4 people. Then I'll build from 3 or 4 people. He stopped. It's been done before. He went back inside. Naomi was in the kitchen. Maya had retreated to her room. The apartment was quiet in the specific way that apartments were quiet when the day had been too large, and the night had arrived before anyone was ready for it. He stood in the kitchen doorway. She looked at him. Read whatever was on his face. How bad? They're redirecting the Busan contractor relationships. My father contacted them individually. Better terms. She absorbed this. How many will hold? 3, maybe 4. Then we start with 3 or 4. Naomi, stop. She set down the glass she'd been holding. Turned to face him fully. I know what you're about to say. I know the version of this conversation where you tell me it's worse than you thought, that I should take what was agreed, that the arrangement was for 6 months and 6 months is almost up, and the practical thing is for you to walk away clean, he said. I know, she looked at him. I know that's the practical thing. I know it's what the arrangement said. I know it's what I told myself for 4 months. This was always going to be. She stopped. I don't want the practical thing. He was very still. She stopped again, looked at her hands. I want the thing that scares me, which is staying. Which is being here when there are 3 contractors and a shell company and cameras outside your building, and your father's organization is being handed to people who are worse than you. She looked up. I want to help you build it, the real version. Not because you asked me to, and not because of any arrangement. Because I look at what you're trying to do, and I believe it can be done, and I want to be the person doing it beside you. The kitchen was very small. He crossed it in 2 steps, and she didn't move back, and he put his hand against her face, the way you touched something you'd been carrying for a long time, without letting yourself hold properly. And she put her hand over his, and they stood there in the small kitchen with the lamplight, and the dying plant on the balcony, and the city sits outside doing its relentless city thing, and neither of them moved. The council voted tonight, he said quietly. I'm not Kang Tae-jun of the organization anymore. I'm just Tae-jun. I know, she said. I liked him better anyway. He almost smiled. Almost. Then something shifted, and the almost became the real thing, and she saw it. And for the first time in the months of careful distance, something in her face came fully open. Tomorrow, he said, I'm going to do something public. Something I can't take back. Something that changes. I know, she said. I'll be there. You don't know what it is yet. I know you. She held his gaze. That's enough. Outside on the street below, a car moved past and its headlights swept briefly across the kitchen wall and then were gone, and the night settled back over everything. And Tae-jun stood in Naomi Carter's small kitchen in Mapo district, holding the face of the woman who had walked into the worst hour of his year and refused to be afraid of him, and understood, fully and without qualification, that the thing with no clean name had a name after all. He just hadn't let himself say it until now. And tomorrow, in front of cameras and reporters, and everyone his father had spent a lifetime trying to make him perform for, He was going to do the only thing left that his father had never planned for. He was going to tell the truth about all of it, out loud, in public, in a voice that didn't know how to be quiet about the things that mattered. The night held, the city held, and Naomi Carter's hand was warm against his, and her eyes were steady, and everything that was about to break open would break open in the morning. Tonight was just tonight, and tonight was enough. He didn't sleep. He lay on Naomi's couch with one arm behind his head and looked at the ceiling of her apartment and listened to the building settle and the street outside go quiet by degrees. And somewhere around 2 in the morning, he stopped trying to sleep and simply let the night be what it was. He could hear Faya's breathing through the thin wall, the slow, deep rhythm of someone young enough to sleep through the end of the world. He could hear the city. He could hear faintly, from the direction of Naomi's room, the specific quiet of someone else also not sleeping. He thought about his father sitting in the organizational office after the vote, in the room that smelled like the same furniture polish it had smelled like since Tae-jun was 9 years old, with the weight of what had been accomplished and the particular absence of the thing that couldn't be voted away. He thought about Jun-ho somewhere outside Seoul by now, carrying 23 years, and a decision he'd made in 8 months of fear. He thought about the contractors Baek had named, 3 who hadn't redirected yet, maybe 4. Small numbers to build anything from. He thought about Naomi saying, "I know you." That's enough. At 4:15 he got up, found his jacket, and sat at the small kitchen table with his phone and a notepad he'd found in a drawer, and he wrote. Not strategy, not logistics. He wrote down what he was going to say in the morning, in front of whatever cameras were waiting, in the specific language of a man who had spent his entire adult life managing what he revealed and had decided to stop. He crossed things out, rewrote, crossed out again. At 5:45, Naomi appeared in the kitchen doorway in a gray sweatshirt and bare feet, carrying the expression of a person who had also been awake for most of the night and had stopped pretending otherwise. She looked at the notepad. What's that? What I'm going to say. She came to the table, sat across from him. He turned the notepad so she could read it. She read it slowly, all of it. She didn't rush. When she finished, she looked up and didn't say anything for a moment. And then she said, "This part." She put her finger on a paragraph near the middle. "Don't say this part." "Why?" "Because it explains too much. You're telling them the reasoning behind the choices. You don't owe them the reasoning." She looked at him. "Tell them what happened, what you did, what you're doing now. The why is yours." He looked at the paragraph. She was right. He crossed it out. And this she pointed to the last line. "Change this to what?" She thought for a moment. "To whatever's actually true, not the version that sounds clean." He looked at the last line, crossed it out, wrote something else. Turned the notepad toward her, she read it, nodded once. Yes. They sat in the early morning quiet of her kitchen, while the city outside started its daily reassembly, and she made coffee with the efficiency of someone who had been making coffee in that kitchen for 2 years and knew exactly how it worked. And she set a cup in front of him without asking how he took it, which was because she already knew, which was something he noticed, and then set aside because noticing it too directly felt like something he wasn't ready to do before a thing this large. "The cameras will be outside your building," she said, "and wherever they've tracked me to since. Dong-wook can manage the location. Pick a place that's yours, not your father's," he thought. The National Museum steps. She looked at him. It's public. It's not a corporate address. It's not anything connected to the organization or the family. He looked at his coffee. It's just a place. "Okay, I want you there." She looked at him steadily. "I said I would be. Not beside me, not as part of it. I'm not using you as a prop for whatever this is. I want you there because I want you there. That's the only reason." She held his gaze for a moment. "I know the difference," she said. "I've known the difference for a while now." Maya emerged from her room at 7, looked at both of them at the kitchen table, with the notepad and the coffee cups and the weight of the morning on everything, and said, "Are we doing this today?" "Yes," Naomi said. "Okay." Maya got a glass of water, drank it, and looked at Tae-jun. "Don't mess up what you say." He almost smiled. "I'll try." "Don't try. Just say the real thing. People can tell when you're saying the real thing." She refilled the glass. "It's the only thing that works." They arrived at the National Museum steps at 10:40. Dong-wook had managed the press notification with the controlled efficiency That was his particular gift, enough advance information to bring the cameras, not enough to allow for pre-positioning or management. 6 outlets became 9 by the time the car pulled up. By the time Tae-jun stepped out, there were 11 cameras and 3 print journalists, with recorders and a crowd of people who had been walking past and had stopped because something was happening. Naomi got out of the car behind him. She stood at the base of the steps with Dong-wook and Maya, who had come because Naomi had said, when Maya asked, that she wasn't going to be the kind of sister who left someone home during the important things. Tae-jun walked up 4 steps, turned to face the cameras. He didn't have a podium. He didn't have a microphone beyond the ones the journalists were pointing at him. He had the notepad in his jacket pocket, which he didn't take out. He'd memorized it. The real version. The version with the middle paragraph crossed out and the last line rewritten. He began. He told them about the arrangement, the way it actually was a business agreement, entered into because he needed political cover, and Naomi Carter needed her family protected. He used those words, business agreement. He didn't dress it up. He told them that the smear campaign, the tabloid photographs, the articles about her father's debt, the photograph of a 17-year-old girl taken outside her school had been coordinated through his father's organizational network with the specific intent of destabilizing his position by making his personal choices a public liability. He told them that his father had initiated a legal maneuver through the Park family to freeze his independent business operation. He told them that the organizational succession vote had taken place the previous evening, and that he had been formally removed from his position in the Kang family organization. He said all of this in the flat, declarative language of a man who had decided that the truth did not require dramatization, that the facts were sufficiently large on their own, and that the performance of emotion was a different thing from the actual having of it. Then he said Naomi Carter did not pursue my money or my position. She was working multiple jobs to support a younger sister she'd raised alone since she was 25. She entered an arrangement with me because her family was being threatened by people connected to my world, and because the terms I offered addressed a real and immediate problem. She performed her part of that arrangement with more integrity than anyone I've worked with in 8 years of running operations, worth significantly more than this conversation. He paused. Then he said the last line, the real version. The one Naomi had approved at the kitchen table at 6 in the morning. He said, I'm not here to rehabilitate my image or to reframe what happened. I'm here because the people who targeted her did it to get to me, and she deserves to have that said out loud in public by the person responsible for the situation that made her a target. He stopped. A journalist called out a question before he'd finished stopping. Something about the organization, the succession, the formal charges. He said, I have nothing to add to what I just said. The Busan Maritime Logistics Company is independently registered and independently operational. Anyone with questions about the organizational succession should contact the Kang family's press representation. He came back down the steps. The cameras followed. The questions kept coming. He walked through them with the specific quality of a man who has said the thing he came to say and has closed the door on the conversation, which was different from avoidance and visible as different to anyone watching carefully. Naomi was at the bottom of the steps. He stopped in front of her. Her face was doing the complicated thing, the multiple-layered thing that wasn't readable as a single emotion because it wasn't a single emotion. There was something raw in the lower layer, and something that was almost anger, and something that was something else entirely. The unnamed thing that had been building for 6 months in hotel lobbies and penthouse kitchens and the back of cars moving through Seoul at night. You said my name, she said. Yes, on camera, in front of... Yes. She looked at him. The cameras were still running. She knew that. She made the conscious choice to be here, to be standing here, which was itself a kind of statement. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, the arrangement didn't.